What is going on, Headliner Nation? Jake, Fantasy Headliners. Hopefully everyone's doing well out there today. We're talking about the quarterbacks we're going to start and sit here in Week 10 fantasy football, and we're not wasting a whole lot of time. We're diving right into the content. If you enjoy that, hit the like button for me, and there's timestamps down below if you're looking for those as well. But we're going to kick it off Thursday Night Football, the Atlanta Falcons and Carolina Panthers. And right off the bat, we have one of my arch nemesis here. It's Marcus Mariota. I cannot seem for the life of me to figure out Marcus Mariota here in 2022. In games that he should struggle, he does great. In games that he should excel, he kind of craps the bed, but overall quarterback 11 on the year, and just had his best game of the season against this same Carolina team just a couple weeks ago in Week 8, where he had 253 yards passing and 3 touchdowns, along with 43 rushing yards. But they're not throwing the ball a ton here in Atlanta just yet, averaging 22.4 pass attempts per game. That's 30th in the NFL. We need that rushing upside at times from Marcus Mariota. He's averaging right around 6 carries a game, so that will help bump up that volume just a little bit. Going up against Carolina, who got torched by Joe Mixon last week, they're allowing 16.8 fantasy points per game to opposing quarterbacks. That's 15th, but right now, this defense is actually pretty banged up in Carolina. For injuries on the Atlanta side of things, we have Matt Hennessy, center. He's already been ruled out, and we already know that they lost just a little bit ago offensive tackle Elijah Wilkinson. So overall, the offensive line banged up a little bit, but it's really the lack of consistency that is most concerning to me when it comes to Marcus Mariota in fantasy football. A lot of times, players don't perform well when facing a team they've already faced that season. It's really hard to beat the same team twice in 1 year in the NFL. I have him as a start this week, but it's more of a low confidence start, and more than likely because I have him listed as a start, he's probably going to suck. But come on, Marcus, let me get one right. Can I get one right this year, Marcus? Please. His opponent, PJ Walker. No, we're not starting PJ Walker, because which PJ Walker actually shows up? The one who faced this team 2 weeks ago and threw for 317 yards and a touchdown and also ran for another 20 yards? Or the guy who went 3 of 10 last week, only had 9 yards and 2 interceptions, got pulled for Baker Mayfield, and now we know that there's a quarterback carousel in Carolina. That's a pretty big swing right there, and not one that I really want to tempt fate with. It's another team that doesn't throw the ball a ton. On the year, the Panthers are averaging just under 30 pass attempts per game as is. Now going up against the Atlanta Falcons, they allow just over 20 fantasy points per game, 6th most in the league, and defensive back AJ Terrell is still questionable at the time of this recording and may actually be ruled out here shortly. Now the offensive line still dealing with multiple injuries, and there's always that chance that PJ Walker just pops off. But given the track record, do you feel comfortable starting a quarterback that just got pulled from his game the previous week due to poor performance? That's not really a guy that I'm looking to start in fantasy football, so he's going to be a sit. Let's move on to Sunday football now, but not Sunday afternoon. Don't forget, we're going to Germany, but early on Sunday morning for the Seattle Seahawks and Tampa Bay Buccaneers. We'll start it off with Geno, who's currently quarterback 8 overall on the season, has had at least 200 yards passing and 2 touchdowns now in 3 straight games, only has 4 interceptions overall on the year. But how does the travel to Germany affect this game? We know that London games have a tendency to be a little bit off, right? These players are out of their normal routine. The potential upsides are greatly limited most of the time in these long travel games. So what's going to happen with Germany now? Another team that's not throwing the ball a lot, and that's because Kenneth Walker is out there just running off. He's like Forrest Gump. He just keeps running all over the field. They're only averaging 31.7 pass attempts per game, 22nd in the league. The Bucks defense, they're allowing 16 fantasy points per game to opposing quarterbacks, which is 18th in the league, kind of middle of the pack. No other major injury concerns here, but I love what I've seen from Geno Smith on the season, and you should too. My biggest concern of any in this game is not the matchup against Tampa Bay. It's the travel. It's the change in routine going to Germany. It gives me a little bit of pause for the cause, right? But right now, the way he's been playing, really hard to sit Geno Smith. How about his opponent, Tom Brady, who has now fallen outside of the top 12 overall on the season, sitting at quarterback 13, coming off another game in which he just threw 1 touchdown. That's 5 straight weeks now without multiple touchdowns on the year. And what's really puzzling to me is, what was this offense reliant on late in that game to get a victory? Was it Chris Godwin? Was it Mike Evans? No, it was Scotty motherfucking Miller out there. That's when you know things are not going great in Tampa Bay, when you're having to rely on Scotty Miller when you have the other aforementioned names that I just listed. The volume is there. We know that's not a problem. They're throwing the ball a butt ton, over 40 times a game now in 4 straight. Actually threw the ball 58 times just last week. Going against Seattle, they allow just under 18 fantasy points per game, 11th most in the NFL. The defense right now for Tampa Bay, they're hurting, right? Which means Tampa Bay is going to give up more points. If they're giving up more points, that means Tom Brady has to throw the ball more. And we know they're not overly reliant on a run game, so that helps. That's a little bit of a silver lining, I guess you could say there. But at some point, this offense is going to improve. Maybe they're not what they were in years past, but they have nowhere to go but up. Tom Brady is still scoring 17 plus fantasy points a game in 4 of his last 6 contests. So he isn't absolutely cratering and burying your fantasy team. Is the ceiling what we want it to be? No, but the floor has still remained fairly safe because he's had to throw it so much. All right, let's move on to the afternoon games now. The Minnesota Vikings and Buffalo Bills. We got Kirk Cousins out there living his best life, right? I'm not taking my shirt off and I ain't got that many gold chains, but I'll do the dance the entire time we're talking about Kirk Cousins. He now has 2+ touchdowns in 3 straight games. He loves his new weapon in TJ Hawkinson. I mean, oh yeah, feel it right now. Kurt, he's been a solid, safe start almost every single week this year. This is really hard to do and focus on what I'm saying. They're throwing the ball on average 38 times a game, 6th highest in the NFL. Now they have a matchup against the Bills, though, who are only allowing 12.7 fantasy points per game. Now I'm getting out of breath to opposing quarterbacks, but their defense banged up. Poyer, Milano, White, Russo. Now is the time to strike against the Buffalo Bills. There's no major injuries of concern in Minnesota, and I respect this matchup. I'm not going to go out there and just sell the Bills short. I respect that it's a road game, but Minnesota needs some freaking respect as well with as great as they're playing, and I'm still rocking with Kirk Cousins. I mean, I wasn't expecting that to be that difficult. I could barely read my notes because I was gyrating my head. Anyway, let's talk about Josh Allen, because a lot of people want to know what's going on with the elbow of Josh Allen, and I would love to sit here and tell you I have all the answers. I do not have all the answers, but there is some concerns here surrounding Josh Allen. Now, obviously, if he's healthy, we're starting him. I don't need to go into all of his stats and all of his numbers to prove to you why Josh Allen is a solid start. It's all surrounding the injury and his availability going into the week. The fact that reports are already coming out reminding everybody who the backup quarterback here, which is Case Keenum, kind of gives me a little bit of concern. So this is definitely one of those situations where I'm following it closely throughout the week. I'm making a lot of phone calls to the doc. I'll be watching his injury update on Friday to see what we know about Josh Allen then. If he's going to be limited, if he's a game time decision, just be sure to have another option on your bench just in case he does not play. If they say he's going to be limited and you have another great option on your bench, a great streaming option, maybe somebody else we cover in this show, I'm not going to hold it against you if you want to play it a little bit safer this week, but I also don't want to ensue panic here and basically come out and say that Josh Allen isn't playing, because I don't know that just yet. If he's fully healthy, we know we start him. If he's not, that's when maybe we look at a safer option. How about we move on to the Detroit Lions and Chicago Bears, starting off with Jared Goff, currently quarterback 16 overall. And while we saw him throw for multiple touchdowns for the first time in forever in week 9, he also had the fewest passing yards he's had in a game all year long with only 137. He's been pretty solid, but that is not great. He's throwing the ball on average just under 35 times a game. The Bears allowing right around 16.5 fantasy points per contest. The majority of the injuries here are on the defensive side of the football, similar to Tom Brady, right? His defense giving up points, he's having to play from behind. Now, I don't love Goff, but his floor has been fairly safe throughout the year, and this matchup really isn't that bad. What could really make this matchup better for Jared Goff would be having TJ Hawkinson. But no, They shipped him to Minnesota, so he doesn't have TJ Hawkinson in this matchup. That hurts his overall ceiling for sure. He can't rely on a bunch of nobodies out there catching touchdowns every week, kind of like what happened in week 9, and we haven't seen a whole lot of Amon-Ra here as of late. For now, sitting Jared Goff. How about Justin Fields? I will not sit Justin Fields. I have been waiting for this moment for what feels like years, even though it really hasn't even been 2 years yet, but I'm just glad to see this kid succeed. We've been talking about him forever and the potential that he could possess in an offense that would just give him the keys to the car. And now all of a sudden, dude's got the keys and he is joyriding across the country. He's up to quarterback 7 overall on the season. Over the last 4 weeks of the fantasy football season, he is quarterback 1 overall. He's outscored Mahomes and Allen and Burrow. Everybody else out there, he's beaten over the last 4 weeks. He's playing absolutely great. But let's be honest, a lot of it has to do with the rushing upside, but that's okay because I don't really expect that to stop. Now, of course, he's also improved in the passing game. He has 5 passing touchdowns over his last 2 games played. He'd only had 5 passing touchdowns the entire year in weeks 1 through 7. So he's making ginormous strides as of right now. Still only throwing the ball 21 times a game, 32nd in the league. That's still dead last. Not a lot of volume, but luckily the rushing upside is boosting that up for him. Now he gets the Lions though. And the Lions allow the 3rd most fantasy points to opposing quarterbacks at 21.6 fantasy points per game, unless your name is Aaron Rodgers, and then apparently they own you. But this offensive line still a little bit banged up, but that is okay. That is leading to this pocket collapsing at times, and that's what's leading to Justin Fields running amok all over the field. Now, one thing that I can say that right now this guy has that he hasn't had in his NFL career as of yet is confidence and swagger. Once he possesses that, he's kind of like in that Joe Burrow category. When he's confident, he's playing a lot better. Just like everybody else for the most part. When you know what you're doing, when you feel confident in what you have to do, you just perform better. And this is the first time we've seen Justin Fields with it in a long time. And he's doing it with not a lot of help either. The running game is non-existent. Luckily, he gets Chase Claypool in there. Hopefully, Darnell Mooney can take a step forward because what we're seeing right now could continue rest of season. He's going to be a start. How about the Jacksonville Jaguars and Kansas City Chiefs? And we'll start it off with Trevor Lawrence, who's currently quarterback 9 overall in the season. But now all of a sudden, we're back to this crap of only 1 touchdown passing a week. I thought we had moved past this, Trevor. We need more passing touchdowns, Trevor. He hasn't had multiple touchdown passes in a game now since week 4. But what's maybe a little bit more worrisome here is the drop in passing volume. Now, we know that Travis Etienne is out there just a man on a mission right now, touching the ball almost 30 times a game. We love that. We absolutely adore that for Travis Etienne owners. But what does that hurt? That hurts Trevor Lawrence a lot because he's not having to throw the ball as much, averaging only 34 pass attempts on the year as of right now. But now he gets to go up against the Kansas City Chiefs. They allow just a tick under 20 fantasy points per game to opposing quarterbacks. No major injuries of concern here. And even though I believe that Travis Etienne is going to find success once again this week against Kansas City, I also expect Jacksonville to be trailing and having to throw the ball, and that can help Trevor Lawrence be a fringe start. Now, is he going to be somebody that's well up inside my top 10? No, probably not. Maybe be a little bit lower ranked, but has the opportunity for a bigger game. His opponent always has that opportunity for a big game. It's Patrick Mahomes. He's currently quarterback 2 overall and has now had at least 2 passing touchdowns in all but 1 game this year. Oh yeah, he's also thrown for over 420 yards now in back-to-back games. Not to mention, he just had 63 yards rushing and a touchdown in week 9. We start getting rushing Patrick Mahomes, the top's going to be blown off. This scoring output here for him here this year. But one thing we know is they're going to throw the ball a lot. They don't care about running. None of these running backs even had like 5 yards rushing this past week. It was Patrick Mahomes in the passing game and the rushing game, and that was about it. They're averaging 42 attempts per game, but had 68 in week 9. That is a crazy number. Now, the Jags, they allow almost 18 fantasy points per game, 12th most in the league. No other major injuries of concern here. This team has really just abandoned any resemblance of a run game, and we still haven't even really seen Kadarius Toney worked in very much. Now, it's come out that Mecole Hardman kind of banged up a little bit. He's questionable. Does that mean that we just get Kadarius Toney in some more situations? And if it does, it doesn't hurt Patrick Mahomes at all. But I feel like I'm selling you on Patrick Mahomes, and you're probably already starting him. Anyway, how about the Cleveland Browns and Miami Dolphins? Start off with Jacoby Brissett here, who really hasn't been that bad on the season. The ceiling is just very low. It's like walking into like a really old house, or maybe like a tiny house or something. Maybe somebody's got a cave in the backyard, whatever. It feels like you got to duck to get in there. That's how low the ceiling is for Jacoby Brissett. Only has one game all year with multiple passing touchdowns. Can't really rely on the rushing touchdowns each week either. Throwing the ball on average 32 times a contest. Now going up against Miami is a great matchup. They allow more points to fantasy quarterbacks than any other team in the NFL at 22.7 per game. Still multiple pieces of the offensive line missing here. David Njoku still questionable as well. Not a very high passing volume offense, and I expect a whole lot of Nick Chubb and a whole lot of Kareem Hunt. And why is that? They need to limit offensive opportunities for the Miami Dolphins. Keep the ball away from Tua and Tyreek and Jalen Waddle. Keep the ball on your side. Keep the clock running, because if you give them more possessions, they're going to put up big numbers on you. So for right now, got Jacoby Brissett as a sit. Speaking of Tua, though, no, he's going to be a start for me right now, sitting at quarterback 12 overall on the season, despite missing 2 games, only playing 7 so far this year. Now, if you take his per game average of what he's averaging so far here in 2022 and add in 2 games worth of production, the guy is verge top 5 right now, has had 300 yards and 3 touchdowns now in back-to-back games, averaging over 35 pass attempts per contest. Going up against Cleveland, though, not the easiest of matchups. They're easier to run on than they are to throw on. They give up the 10th fewest fantasy points to opposing quarterbacks. No other major injuries of concern here, though, but the X factor has to be Jalen Waddle and Tyreek Hill. There's no team out there that can stop both of those guys. They may limit one of them, but all that does is open the door for the other to have a field day. Can't sit Tua here. He's obviously a start. How about the Houston Texans and New York Giants? We'll start off with Davis Mills. Now, nothing against Davis Mills. He isn't bad. He doesn't have a whole lot to work with, right? I mean, Chris Moore was his number 1 wide receiver. You probably don't even know who the hell Chris Moore is until you saw him on TV last week. Plus, Dameon Pierce is just running the ball so well in this backfield. He's taking away volume in the passing game. They're only throwing the ball 32 times a contest, but he hasn't even reached that number even in back-to-back games now. Going up against the Giants, they only allow 15.9 fantasy points per game to opposing quarterbacks. You got Brandon Cook still questionable. Nico Collins hurt. Guard Justin McCray, questionable to play as well. There's just not enough to trust here. We ain't starting Davis Mills right now. And honestly, I ain't starting his opponent either. Daniel Jones, I have not forgotten about the kick to the lower region that he gave me the week before the bye. I cannot rely on any form of consistency here from Daniel Jones. He has 4 games this season with no passing touchdowns and only has 1 touchdown rushing since week 4. As soon as he just sucks you in, and then I haven't forgiven what happened to Daniel Jones before the bye week. Now, they're only throwing the ball on average 27 times a game, 29th in the league. Houston, really freaking good against opposing quarterbacks, allowing only 13.1 fantasy points per game, 5th fewest in the NFL. Even though, they're coming off the bye week, they still have a few injuries to deal with. Daniel Bellinger is out. Kenny Golladay is perma-questionable, if that even matters at this point. Still multiple offensive linemen banged up as well. And even though the ceiling is there, even though we can see these top 10 performances, we also see performances of him barely trying to break 10 fantasy points, and I can't take that big of a swing. I can't take that gamble. I'll let somebody else have that headache. He's going to be a sit. The New Orleans Saints and Pittsburgh Steelers now. We got Andy Dalton dropping outside of the top 25 at the position, and now there's people out there saying they want to see Jameis Winston back under center and getting that job back. That alone, right there, should be enough to say, you know what, I'm not going to start Andy Dalton. They're only throwing the ball 34 times a game. It's not a bad matchup going up against Pittsburgh. They allow over 21 fantasy points per game, 4th most in the league. But who knows when all these pass-catching weapons are going to be healthy? Who knows when the offensive line is going to be healthy? And now that we kind of have a feeling that there's a short leash with Andy Dalton, what happens if he comes out and struggles in a matchup in which they're supposed to put up some points? We could be seeing Jameis Winston back in this ballgame, and if that's the fact, we don't want to start anybody that has the chance of being pulled, and Dalton is getting scary close. His opponent, Kenny Pickett, he's coming off the bye week. Hopefully they figured out some things in this Pittsburgh offense, but honestly, I got to see it before I can trust it. He only has 2 passing touchdowns in his 4.5 games as a starter here in Pittsburgh to 8 interceptions. Still throwing the ball a lot, right close to 37 times a game, going up against New Orleans, who allows just under 17 fantasy points per game. Even though they're fairly healthy on offense, the defense still banged up in Pittsburgh. No Chase Claypool anymore. Remember, he's now in Chicago, but I just need to see them figure this offense out before I want to consider starting Kenny Pickett in fantasy football. On to Denver and Tennessee. Start off with Mr. Or maybe it should be Mr. Limited, Russell Wilson of the Denver Broncos. He's sitting at quarterback 21 coming off the bye week. Now, hopefully that time off gave Russ some time to heal up himself. Remember, he was dealing with multiple injuries prior to the bye week, but what is this offense going to look like? Are they going to make any improvements in Denver? This dude only has 6 passing touchdowns on the year, and on the surface, that alone makes me not want to start him either. They're averaging 34 pass attempts per game. Tennessee, though, is way easier to throw on than they are to run on. They're allowing 20.8 fantasy points per game, 5th most in the NFL to opposing quarterbacks. Still multiple injuries on this offensive line. We know Russ isn't 100% either, but this is all about the matchup coming off the bye week. This sets them up for some success here this week. If it does not happen this week, it may not happen at all rest of season. The stars are kind of aligning for this to be a decent game for the Denver offense, and that's why he is a verge start. His opponent, Ryan Tannehill, could be Malik Willis at this point. Doesn't really matter. The scores aren't going to change. They're not producing. There's no volume there. It's a bad matchup against Denver, who honestly, their pass defense, pretty freaking good, allowing only 10 fantasy points per game to opposing quarterbacks, which is fewest in the NFL. Ryan Tannehill injured himself. Malik Willis can't complete a pass to a wide receiver. No, I'm not being sarcastic. The kid actually had some flashes of some pretty good football play, but do you realize that they didn't complete a pass to a wide receiver last week? That is a problem. Not enough in this passing offense to really be excited to start either one of these guys, especially if Tannehill is limited in any way, so he's going to be a sit. How about the Indianapolis Colts and Las Vegas Raiders? And as bad as I don't want to start anyone in Tennessee, I really don't want to start Sam Ehlinger either. Honestly, full disclosure here, I flirted with the ability to put negative numbers in here, and it let me do it. And I really thought about putting in some negatives here. But then I'd realize, I'm not trying to just bash the fan base of the Colts, so I'll go back to a 0 in production because this offense is absolutely dead unless they go back to Matt Ryan. Now, is Matt Ryan the savior? Is Matt Ryan an all-pro quarterback? Is Matt Ryan going to lead them to victories? Probably not, but when it comes to fantasy football, Matt Ryan greater than Sam Ehlinger at this point. They're barely throwing the ball 30 times a game. Even though this is a great matchup going up against the Raiders, they allow the 2nd most fantasy points to opposing quarterbacks at 22.5. And I have 0 interest in starting anyone here. It's still unclear whether or not JT is going to be good to go. He's back at practice and limited here today, but honestly, when it comes to injuries, I feel like the biggest injury here is the broken heart to the Colts fan base. Having to endure what this team is putting them through is mind-blowing. I don't know if I've ever seen a team fall so far down this quickly as the Colts. I mean, they were a playoff contender just last season. There's just been no flashes of potential in this offense with Sam Ehlinger. He's a sit. And really, Derek Carr isn't much safer. Talk about a Jekyll Hyde offense. The first half of Week 9 looked like what we expected this offense to be. Deep down the field to Davante Adams, scoring points, pushing the football. The second half came. It looked like the very first practice of The Little Giants, that old movie with those kids that had makeshift pads on. It did not look good for the Raiders. They're still throwing the ball 36 times a game. They're going up against the Colts, who allow just over 15 fantasy points per contest. Darren Waller is still questionable. At this point, I don't even know if that matters because nobody else is really catching passes besides Davante Adams. Anyway, you just don't know what team is going to show up. They're capable of some great days, and the silver lining in this one is Derek Carr is still technically scoring fantasy points. Just last week, he had 259 yards, 2 touchdowns, no interceptions. He's protecting the football and only has 1 interception. since week 3. Now, in this ball game here, I expect Davante Adams to find some success again and help give him that safer floor. He is a verge start, a bye-week fill-in, and somebody who's going to be a lot lower in my rankings than inside the top 12. So, verge start, very verge start here for Derek Carr. How about we go down to the Dallas Cowboys and Green Bay Packers? We got Dak Prescott coming off the bye week. We've seen him get better in each game coming back off of injury. Had 250 yards passing and 2 touchdowns in week 8 prior to their bye week. The best numbers he's had so far this year. The passing offense hasn't been huge in Dallas overall in the season, but you have to expect that number is going to increase now with a healthy Dak. A lot of that was affected by Cooper Rush earlier in the season. Now we're hearing rumors that Odell Beckham could become a Dallas Cowboy at some point. You don't do that if you're not throwing the ball a lot, but now they're going up against Green Bay. They're only allowing 12.8 fantasy points per game to opposing quarterbacks, 4th fewest in the NFL, but this defense right now for Green Bay is absolutely banged up on all 3 levels, and they can be had as of right now. When it comes to injuries on the Dallas side of things, we know that Zeke is still questionable. Whether or not he plays or not is up in the air. How about offensive tackle Tyron Smith? He's still a couple weeks from returning. That's a huge loss on that offensive line that they've been waiting to get back for weeks there in Dallas, but overall fairly healthy. It's going to be a butt-cold day in Green Bay. Dak's balls are going to be frozen. I mean, his footballs, they're going to be cold. They're going to be cold footballs in Green Bay. Even if Zeke misses or is limited, I'm expecting a little bit more from this passing game, and that's why I'm starting Dak here this week for his opponent, Aaron Rodgers. Did we just see like a full Aaron Rodgers meltdown in week 9? 3 interceptions in one game against Detroit, some of which were like super bad too. I'm talking about underthrowing a 3-yard pass into the ends. I mean, Aiden Hutchinson picking up. It did not look good whatsoever for Aaron Rodgers. I mean, the dude just lost to the Lions in a very ugly game. He's still throwing the ball over 36 times a game. Dallas allowing only 13.7 fantasy points per contest, though is 7th fewest in the league. We know now that Romeo Doubs has been ruled out. Christian Watson is questionable. Aaron Jones is questionable, even though he is practicing as of right now. And then multiple members of this offensive line banged up as well. Just not a good place right now for Green Bay. It's a home game, so that's why he's getting close to that verge start, but right now, got him in the sit column. How about the Arizona Cardinals and Los Angeles Rams? We got Kyler Murray, currently quarterback 6 overall. He's scored at least 25 fantasy points now in back-to-back games. He loves having himself some DeAndre Hopkins back in the lineup. And honestly, this team is pretty bad. So they're trailing a lot, which means that they're throwing the ball a lot. Now, he did struggle against this same Rams defense back in week 3, where he threw for 314 yards, but no touchdowns and only 8 yards rushing. He didn't have DeAndre Hopkins in that game, though, so maybe that could help boost it up a little bit. The Rams are allowing 14.6 fantasy points per game to opposing quarterbacks, 8th fewest in the league. The offensive line is the biggest concern here for the Arizona Cardinals, though. Multiple members of the offensive line, starting members of the offensive line, are hurt. There's always that rushing upside. And really, if we can get Kyler Murray to get 30 yards rushing and a touchdown in this game, you'll be very happy with starting him. The ceiling could be a little bit lower this week, but I still have him as a start nonetheless, somebody who's just putting up points all year long. His opponent, Matthew Stafford, not putting up points all year long. He hasn't thrown for multiple touchdowns in the game since week 2. We're going into week 10, Matthew. You ain't had multiple touchdown passes since week 2, hasn't thrown for more than 200 yards even in back-to-back games, and didn't throw a touchdown the last time they faced the Arizona Cardinals back in week 3 either. They're still throwing the ball 36 times a game. Arizona does allow over 20 fantasy points per contest, 7th most in the league. Another team with a banged-up offensive line, but at least Cooper Kupp looks like he's good to go. Didn't really seem to be too limited last week. A healthy Kupp in a good matchup always gives Matthew Stafford a decent floor. The ceiling not really there, and I believe there's better options this week, so I have him as a sit here personally. Which will take us then to Sunday Night Football. The Los Angeles Chargers, San Francisco 49ers. We'll start off with Justin Herbert. Now, no, I wasn't feeling too fancy there, so I said his name correctly, because right now Justin Herbert is on the verge of falling outside of the top 15 at the position on the season. But come on, give the guy a little bit of a break. He's got no Keenan Allen and no Mike Williams. His top 2 wide receivers out. That would affect any quarterback in the NFL, but only has 3 touchdowns over his last 3 weeks combined. That's not what we want from the Chargers offense. The volume's still there. They're throwing the ball 43 times a game. That's huge numbers. Actually have gone over 50 2 of the last 3 games. Now they get a matchup going up against San Francisco, though, who's coming off their bye week. San Francisco allows only 14.7 fantasy points per game, but their defense also missing a few key pieces as well on all three levels. It's just a lot of injuries to deal with for Justin Herbert. Remember, his offensive line, losing Rashawn Slater weeks ago was a huge loss there as well. Luckily, Austin Eckler is keeping this team afloat. Josh Palmer will eat up some targets. Do we see more DeAndre Carter? Can Gerald Everett get some more targets for the love of all things holy? There's still some options out there. They're not as great options as they could be really in LA, but they're solid options. The ceiling has dropped way down for Justin Herbert. And where my confidence used to be up in the 20s every single week has now dropped down to verge sit. But I know he can still produce in this offense. It's just not as given as it has been in years past. This may be, this week in week 10, the lowest I've ranked Justin Herbert in quite some time. So make sure you keep an eye out for the rankings video because he is nowhere near an automatic start here this week. His opponent, Jimmy G. I have liked Jimmy G for years on this channel. Coming off of their bye week, a lot of people have forgotten the stability of Jimmy G. He has 4 straight games now with at least 2 passing touchdowns and 235 yards or more passing in each of those games as well. They're not a huge, heavy passing team, but the addition of CMC is opening up all kinds of possibilities for this offense. Efficient playmakers or just fill the field for the San Francisco 49ers. Now they're going up against the Chargers. They allow only 15.7 fantasy points per game, 21st in the league. Debo is still questionable, but that's okay. They still have CMC and George Kittle and Brandon Ayuk out there. Big-time playmakers still at the disposal, and this creative offense in San Francisco just gives them the opportunity for big points each and every game. When I think about Jimmy G, it kind of reminds me of Kirk Cousins. It's like discount Cousins out there, discount double Cousins. I don't know what you want to call him. Jimmy G's a start for me here this week, which will then take us to Monday Night Football, the Washington Commandos, Philadelphia Eagles. No, I'm not starting Taylor Heineke here this week. The kid is very fun to watch, and he gives 0 Fs on Sundays. He's just out there to be a gunslinger. Has 6 total touchdowns in 3 games played, but now he's going to be Monday Night Football in the spotlight on the road in Philadelphia against a defense that only allows 11 fantasy points per game to opposing quarterbacks. I love this kid, and I don't love this matchup. He's going to be a sit for Jalen Hurts. Obviously, we're starting ourselves some Jalen Hurts, currently quarterback 5 overall. But what's weird is he hasn't had a rushing touchdown now in 3 weeks. What the hell is going on? It's because he's throwing the touchdowns now and has had at least 2 passing touchdowns in all 3 of those games. Not huge passing volume each week, but he's still running the ball fairly often, 11 times per game. Going up against Washington, they allow the 13th most fantasy points to opposing quarterbacks at 17.5 per contest. No major injuries of concern here. And there's just so many ways for this guy to score. It doesn't matter what the game script is. He can find a way to put up points. Can't sit Jalen Hurts. All right, there you have it. My starts and sits for the quarterback position, Week 10 fantasy football. Hopefully I was able to give you some information that you can then use in your leagues here this week so we can all start the best possible quarterback to score ourselves some motherfucking fantasy points so we can walk away with some victories. If you enjoyed the content, do me a favor, hit the like button down below. Consider subscribing if you haven't already. And I'm going to go ahead and get out of here for the day. Hopefully you have a great rest of your day, a great week, and we'll talk to you later.